I was working on a book called "Don't Skip Out on Me," and "Don't Skip Out on Me" is half of it set in central Nevada on a sheep ranch, and a buddy and I were driving around out maybe an hour northeast of a town called Tonopah, and we were 30 miles from the nearest paved road, and we came over this big desert playa. I mean, it's hard to understand how vast the landscapes are out there. I mean, it's unreal. And we came across a big desert playa that went on and for miles and miles and miles, and we saw what looked like the statue of a black horse out in the middle of it. And so we drove towards it. And once we got close to it, I had binoculars and you could see, hey man, this isn't a statue. It's a old wild Mustang. So we got out and we walked towards it, and we could see that it was an old man. It had a sway back. It had tons of scars on it, and it was completely blind. And it just stopped me in my tracks, to live through all those scars it had and living a hard life as a wild horse in Nevada, to end up alone and blind in the desert is about as bleak as it could be. I think too that idea of ending up the two things a horse hates the most, which is not being able to see what it's scared of and being alone. So I mean, it really had a rough thing. So my buddy and I camped near it that night, and then the next day we went back to where we could get cell reception, and we talked to Bureau Land Management, who came out for the horse, and we kind of kept driving on, and we went even further out, and we came to this old mine that at one time, I think in the early 1900s or so, there was probably 300 guys working it, and then up until the 50s it would open and close, and there was an old assayer shack on it. And if you've ever been to mine site, I mean, people just blow shit up out there, and they don't, it's all about like shooting stuff. But for some reason, this old wooden assayer shack, no one had shot up, and it felt like no one had messed with it in 100 years really. And I just told him, I said, man, I'm gonna get out here, and I'm tired of the way I was drinking. I was tired of the way I was living. I was tired of the way I was in a band for so long. Couldn't quit that. Couldn't quit writing. And I couldn't shake things like seeing a blind horse. Like the darkness of the world was just, I'm a sensitive guy, man. And I was like, that I just can't see stuff like that. So I'm going to just get out here. I made, I'd been traveling with a guy I'd known for, I don't know, man, 40 years. I think I've known the guy. And he just started laughing at me, as old friends do. And he just said, Jesus, you're dramatic. Where are you going to plug in your record player, and your wife will leave you, and then you'll run out of beer, and you'll have to go back to town, and then you'll have to get a job, and then you'll have to beg to get your wife back, and then your whole life will start over again, but much worse. But so when I got home, I couldn't shake the horse, and I couldn't shake that pull of running away. And then I started, at the same time, I started thinking how every musician I've met, really, give or take a couple, had never quit. It's like you guys you played with in high school are still playing, and guys in punk rock bands that go to metal bands if they're good players, or they get tired of playing fast and they start playing bluegrass or country, and they play reggae, and they just never quit. They play calypso if they have to. They'll play covers. They'll play in any kind of band. They just don't quit. And so that was when I first started thinking of why a person does art. Why does a person do art? Why does a guy keep writing songs that no one listens to? Why does a guy never quit being in a band, regardless of if you've had success or not? And so I think it was a combination of all that stuff that made me finally write about music. And I finally figured, I have, maybe this will be my novel, talking about why a person does art, why I write tunes, that kind of stuff. It was, I guess, in a weird sort of way, it was the most personal book because of the horse, and the edge I had on me when I was started thinking about it. But there was a romance to it too that I wanted. I grew up in Reno, And when I was in high school was the tail end of kind of the casino band lifestyle, I guess. And so the couple of guys I played with in high school, their dads were casino musicians. Like the last guys kind of making money at it. And they had, they were working 4 hours a night. They had showgirl girlfriends. They were spending their days by the river, and even at 16, 17, I knew work was miserable, and I came from a real, like, you grind it out kind of family, and work is supposed to be miserable. And then I saw these casino guys and their beautiful girlfriends, and I'm like, man, I wish I could be a casino musician. So I always had a romantic vision of that. It's foolish because, I mean, those aren't great gigs or anything, but to a kid that's going to end up working in warehouses and being a house painter for years, I kind of knew I was going to end up like that. It seemed dreamy, so I made him a journeyman kind of casino player that was a closet songwriter. I mean, I always wrote songs, so I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to live inside the romance of that era, at least for a while, and at least romantic in my mind. So that piece together is the fun part. And then the flashbacks, the idea of why he is the way he is. I mean, that just kind of came. That's in my blood. I can't help but tell those kind of stories. He's from a kind of a rough upbringing, with not a lot of support. He's kind of a damaged person, but Jesus, man, most songwriters I've met in my life are people that align themselves with rock and roll or music or art in general, have a few dents to them, and so that made sense to me. So really, I had all that mixed together, and then for such a short book, it took me years, like pulling stuff out and putting stuff back in, and that whole idea of your thought process when you're alone. When you're alone, your mind swirls around and it thinks about things you might not necessarily want to think about, and so it does that in the book. When he gets stressed, he starts thinking about the things in his past that are stressed. When he starts drinking, his mind drifts to his drinking years. So that quagmire you get in when you're alone too long. I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a lifer musician, a touring musician, makes his living at it, and he said, "Well, why is Al's life so hard? He got a few girlfriends off it. He was in a couple good bands. He made a little bit of money, so there's nothing to complain about." And I always felt that way too. But Al had a big edge on him that he could never really kind of lay to rest, and I think he had a lot of guilt about things, the way he was, and the things he'd done, and so he escapes to that same mining claim I was telling you about, that his uncle, in the book, his uncle owned it and gave it to him. And so I think I knew that he would run into the horse right away. That I just wanted to be around that horse, for my own sake. I wanted to be around it. I'm a sucker for horses, and I hate seeing things in pain, and so I just needed to be around it in my own mind, so I didn't go crazy.